Steensen. She's a journalist. She's been writing a book on basic income in a Norwegian context with Sven Omdal, which was published last year. And this book was based on their experience working and living in several European countries for the last decade, and concerns about the impact of heavy structural trends, such as increasing precariousness of work, automation, pressured welfare systems, and growing income inequality. It's a well-written book that gives a comprehensive account of basic income in a Norwegian context. So, Ingeborg, let's get cracking.
Good morning. Thank you, Christine. There was no queue at the door this morning. This conference is held in the European country where the support for universal basic income is the lowest in Europe. Only 1 out of 3 people in this country said they would favor something like that when asked in the European Social Survey in 2016. Although Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland have major similarities as societies and political models, there are also big differences when you take a closer look. And in the case of UBI, the enthusiasm differs greatly, at least according to this survey. Denmark was, for some reason, not part of this survey, but Sweden was, and people there were just a bit more in favor than the Norwegians. The contrasts were Iceland, with nearly every other person fancying basic income, and especially Finland, where 55% gave thumbs up. My hunch is that this was no coincidence, and this we will get back to shortly, but first I would like to introduce the panelists here, who all represent the Basic Income Earth Network in their countries, and will contribute to updating you on the status of universal basic income discussions in this corner of the world. From your left, we have Roosa Eriksson from Finland, then the Danish representative Martin Bruun Michaelsen, then we have Sweden, Lena, and we have Iceland, Gerdur Palmadottir, and then, last but not least, Øyvind Steensen of Norway. I think we should start with updating ourselves on news, if there are any. And I'm looking at you, Roosa. Finland has, in the past years, become world famous for its basic income experiment, with 2,000 unemployed persons spread around the country, who were picked by the state to receive the same amount in UBI as they had previously had an unemployment benefit, which I understand was 560 euros a month, which is about 1/3 of what the Finnish Consumer Agency says you need to have a decent life in Finland. But they got it with no strings attached so that they could live on it or take a job on top without losing the benefit. And the most common piece of knowledge people in this country have about this is that the experiment was stopped because it was a failure. I googled Finland stops basic income, and I had 2.9 million hits. But this experiment was not stopped like that. It ran its 2 years as planned until the end of last year. Now a preliminary report is out. And what can we draw from it, Roosa?
Well, first of all, I think everyone is already quite familiar with the experiment per se, and I'm not an expert in the actual design, as we have Lena from Gerdur, for example, in this Congress, who knows more about it. But as you just indicated, there has been a lot of misinformation about the actual experiment in the worldwide media. So on the one side, we have people who have thought that the experiment was cancelled, and on the other hand, there have been also like a piece of news saying Finland actually implemented basic income and everything in between, right? So I guess the results, obviously, I think everyone is familiar with the fact that there was no lower or higher employment rate with the recipient and the control group during the first year of the experiment, and that this the survey over the 2 years reveals that the self-perceived well-being was considerably better in the group that received basic income, although it was exactly the same amount of money. But on the other hand, I think that the experiment tells a lot about politics and how, as Minna Eliassen said yesterday, 2 years is a very short time to actually plan and implement and then evaluate a field experiment of this size. But on the other hand, in politics, it's a very long time. So a lot of things can happen during 2 years. And as you might know, Finland also implemented this activation model in the beginning of 2018, which goes to the opposite direction. So it's stricter conditions on and very much based on labor market activation. And yeah, so I think you have to consider that the basic income experiment, although it might sound paradoxical that at the same time the government would test an unconditional basic income but at the same time implement an activation model with stricter conditions. It goes the same way to the same goal of the activation and the idea that increasing or decreasing the incentives that individuals have has an effect on the employment rate. So,
do you think so? People reported less stress and feeling better health. There was no significant change in any way in employment. Do you think that's because the jobs don't exist or because of other restraints in the project? For instance, I read somewhere that in fact, if you were a provider for family, if you needed housing benefits or you needed support for your kids or something, these were conditional to income, so that in fact, if you took on a job, you would have to mind that you didn't have unconditional other support. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, but you also have to consider that since the tax reform wasn't all the tax, the basic income was not taxed, there was also, depending on the group of people who were involved in the experiment group, some people had an overtly extensive incentive to work because the basic income in this experiment was not taxed away either way. So. But it's hard to say. I mean, I don't have an answer to the reasons why people did not or did get employed in this situation. So they, yeah.
So this Finnish government anyway is going in the total opposite direction. More conditionality, less of this, more of what is the big trend in the whole of Europe. And I wonder, did the Finnish experiment in any way inspire anyone else in the Nordic countries? I'm looking at you, Lena.
It's absolutely. I'm very grateful for Finland and doing the.
We don't hear you, I think. Do we hear you? Try to speak, Lena.
I speak louder then.
No, you get this one. Use this one.
Take this.
Yes.
I'm very grateful for Finland to having these pilots because it's changed. I think that survey you were talking about, if that was done today, we would have get a lot of higher result because basic income is a word that people recognize in Sweden now. That's a dramatic change in the last 2 years. The only thing is that it doesn't seem like any politician recognizes it or wants to hear about it. So we used to have party in the parliament that was for basic income, but they're not for anymore. So there are no politicians at all in Sweden that are for basic income. But it's a growing movement, and like I've said before when I've been here, we've started BN 2 weeks ago, and it's totally different people that come into the BN meeting than being active in the different basic income groups. It's a lot more academics and people that looking for new ways. So I think it's very exciting times, very exciting.
In fact, you yourself established a basic income party
Yes.
a few years back,
Yes.
Basinkomstpartiet.
Yes.
I understand now that it's taken over by others, and you have now just started the Swedish chapter of BN.
Yes.
But you ran for parliament last year.
Yes.
How did it go?
It didn't go that well, but I never regret doing it. It was an experience, and it was something I had to do. And we got it up. People started to be aware, and you got people from all over Sweden helping out, leaving leaflets for the elections. So it got people going, not just talking. We were very active. So that was a nice thing, and it's very good that other people taking over. But for me, party politics isn't the way I want to go. So I want to do more than talk about it.
How many votes did you get?
Or should I say that?
Let's just say
800.
Okay. So what did this? What was your takeaway from this experience?
It was hard work, but I met people that they came out from all corners and talked about basic income, and the need is very, it's a great need. And I think that for me, the time has come for it, but I think we are still a bit too advanced in our thinking. A lot of people can't take it in yet, and I think that is our mission, to make the idea of UBI very simple and explain it and get it into all areas of life where it affects people, so you can get people from all areas of life involved in UBI.
So you represent countries with a total population of 27 million people. And I asked each one of you to tell me how many people are members of BN in your countries, and the count is like less than 1,000 people. I wonder, in a time when this is a topic in the World Economic Summit in Davos for many years, the UN Secretary General is talking about it. There are many places where this is a pretty hot topic. Why is it so steep, Øyvind?
Do I have sound? Okay, I have sound. Well, it's a good question. BN Norway has always been small since its inception. We're growing slowly, so that's a good thing. It's going in the right direction. I think we have pretty good support on social media. For instance, membership in BN is quite a bit lower, but growing. So please become a member if you're not, if you want to support us. I don't know, I just generally think there's a big step from supporting something on social media and just clicking on links and liking stuff, etc., to like becoming a member, paying. I know this is a huge drop off of activity the moment you ask someone to do something, like put in their name and something, register.
To what extent is precariousness and insecurity even a reality here?
I think the people who probably need basic income the most are pretty much invisible in Norway, because a lot of people have it so well and stable lives, pretty good salaries, etc. And the people who need basic income are not the people writing in newspapers, or at least the people who need it the most, probably. They are just falling through the cracks of society, and they are pretty much invisible.
You could say that the Nordic countries, I know for Norway for sure, I think it goes for most of all of the countries, that we have many elements of basic income already in the pension system, in free health and education, and in paid parental leave. So I wonder, how do you argue the need for basic income, Gerdur?
Do you hear me? Yeah. Oh, lucky you. I think you were talking about why don't people cling to their basic income idea. I think it's because of this promotion of eradicating poverty. Nobody bloody cares about poor people. and poverty. They don't want to belong there and they're not interested. Just like you don't want to eat healthy food, you just want to eat the junk, even if you know that the healthy food is better for you than the junk. And I think that if we will open up the vision of the job creation and the prosperity that opens up all over with the public, because the basic income will enable entrepreneurs and people and thinkers and carers and just people who are alive. It will allow them to be alive. We have been now implementing the harakiri economy for years and years, and we all know that we are killing the earth. So what? Sustainability without the planet is pretty heavenly. And I don't want to go to heaven that way anyway. So I think if we will put more attention to the prosperity, to the possibility, to the growth of things, then we will have a totally different approach from people. I can feel it in Iceland, because we were talking about being the politics and things like that, and I think that we have come to the conclusion that we want the political parties banned from government, because they are never running for the country or for the public. And it has been so clearly displayed to us in Iceland. This small country of 300,000 people, we can nearly count them on one hand, but still we don't have any control. Corruption is just running the show. We voted the majority for the left Green. They came into government and they got married to the far right. And that marriage is now selling out Iceland. So where we go, we have to change this. So can I finish my suggestion? So we want the political parties to be run like sports clubs. Individually, they care for themselves, and they will get minimum support from the government to run their clubs. And then we will go a little bit like the Swiss way, that is that to have how do you say, projects, that every club can send their representatives, and then we, the people, can choose from those representatives, but they are only elected for this project. So they don't have the continuous bribing possibilities, and they don't go into their future after they stop this job with salary for the rest of their life. You know, they have done the job, they got salary, and they are, you know, they are compensated for what they did. And this is what we are heading.
So, but before we're heading there, we have this political system with parties, and very few of them are interested in UBI. But there are things happening on the red-green side, maybe we can say. Martin, would you tell what is happening in Denmark on that front?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Fine, fantastic. Yeah, in Denmark we are in actually very interesting times. Historically there came out this book, Revolt from the Middle, which most in the basic income, at least in Nordic countries, know about, which sort of took basic income up to a high in the end of the I think it was 80s, starting of the 90s, and then someone took the idea and turned it around and put it into the financial situation, the finance ministry, and they said it would cost 100% tax, and so it just died off from there. Interestingly enough, I don't know why, and then it has just been stagnated since then. But then the last few years, it came up again. Very interestingly, because there was this new party, the Alternative, the Green Party of Denmark, which firstly came into which firstly was elected by a rather large margin from what was expected, and then last year they accepted, also with a rather large margin we didn't expect, that they said, yeah, we want to support basic income, in theory, and that's a big important part, and we want to set a group down who want to look through what does it mean, what does it take, and so on. And then for I think it was 2 months ago or something, they finished with their report, which was called the basic income in Danish. And so in 20 days approximately, it is they are going to have this annual party meeting, where they highly probably should say if they support a basic income, like a policy, or they should say that, well, we support basic income in theory, but its time is not there yet. So that's what we are working on, that is to turn basic income into concrete political reality that can be implemented now. And it's interesting, there was this, I haven't heard of that poll which asked the different countries, and it's interesting that Denmark wasn't in, because it is, in Denmark, there is a lot of support for things around basic income, if you could say that. People don't like that the system has become less trusting, people don't like that there are so many conditions, people don't like this unsecure type of work and all these parts, but to arrive at the conclusion that basic income is the answer to that is sadly more difficult. And an important part is also that we also have a lot of other parties which are, when we talk to them, they're actually internally divided whether they want to support UBI or not, but externally the leadership always says, no, we don't talk about that, that would just ruin the coming election, and so on. So it's moving very much forward in Denmark, but as Roosa said, politics is not always what the people want.
You can approach universal basic income from all directions from all places in the political spectrum, I think, by arguing differently. But in this area, of course, of the world, social democracy has been like the progressive force for people historically. And social democracy is, as I understand it, the parties are very much against UBI, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's the way it is here in this country. To what extent do you try to influence social democracy and the labor movement to adopt UBI? Anyone? Martin?
There are two things to that question. The first is that if the social democracy wasn't so tightly married with the unions, I'm pretty sure that they would at least see the idea in it and actually try to support it. But since the unions are afraid that if people get basic income, they don't need the unions, then a lot of people in the unions are afraid of that, and so is the social democracy, because they fear this, lockdowns where people then leave the unions and then they are not unionized, and then the amount of what you can get for a job and the work conditions and all that will lower, and they're afraid of this bad spiral in a way.
You actually think their agenda is that narrow, that they're just afraid of their own survival?
No, that's what I'm saying. I think one part is that they're afraid of their own survival, and that's fair. But what I see is that on a more ideological front, they're afraid that this would sort of destroy the solidaric foundation of the working class, if you could say that. They're afraid that people would then be individualized so that they better can be exploited.
Yes, and what do you say then? I mean, that's a fair protest, isn't it?
I personally find it unfounded in some way, because mostly, it's weird that if people get money, that they suddenly would stop wanting good working conditions. I find that weird in a sense, because the idea of basic income is that, it's basic. People still want a house, people still want a car, people still want to get into a work where they actually find something meaningful, whether it's volunteering or whether it's paid labor, that doesn't really matter. So So it's interesting that there is this large fear, at least in a Danish context.
Lena, you wanted to add something here?
Yeah. I think the Social Democrats are the hardest to convince about the UBI because they are a working party, so everyone has the right to work. That's what I always get as an argument. And the same with a lot of people on the left. I find it easier to convince people more in the middle, maybe even a little bit to the right, because then it becomes more a freedom question and you can bring different aspects up. And I think that is also a danger because we don't want to have a watered down UBI either. So you have to thread very carefully with party politics and UBI and who takes charge of that question in whichever country we are in. I mean, you see Finland, totally different ideas of UBI from whichever party you came to. So I think it's a too big question to leave to party politicians actually.
Gerdur, what is your smashing argument to convince Social Democrats and the Labour movement that they should adopt UBI?
I think that in the introduction of UBI, we should be much more clear and not mix it with waged salaries or salaries, because it's not. We always the biggest issue is always basic salary and working hours compared to working hours and working paid jobs. And if we keep it separate, then much more clearly, then people talk about it differently. And we are in Iceland now. We have a very strong labor union, and they are exactly the same. They don't want to talk about UBI, except the smartest girl on the team. She's now the union leader in Iceland, and she is all for it. But she's going to keep it until after the elections, which within the Labour Union now, which is now. The agreement was 2 days ago. So I really do expect our Labour Union really to open up for it. And because they are, when you speak to them one-on-one, they're all for it. So I think, and I think it's always a lack of information. They have not given it thought, because people are very much like headliners. They read the headlines, but not the content. And I think that we have to introduce the content much better, and we will do it one-on-one. That's the only way.
Øyvind?
So I think what we're seeing is a little bit of the problem with like middlemen institutions in general, where the incentives or the goals for the unions have been fairness for workers, right? And then after a while, you see that the goal turn to, perhaps to some degree, sadly, to maintaining the institution and the institution's established power. And I think this kind of incentive to have a monopoly on giving workers negotiating power, well, it's not a good argument to front. And in either case, I don't see why lifting up people to have at least some basic negotiating ability with a basic income would decrease the incentives to be a part of a union, because it's just, if you are part of a union, you will have even more negotiating power. So it should be a positive. I don't think it actually should be that hard to sell, but I think the problem is the institutional power and the incentives in just keeping those structures, keeping those jobs, etc., which is, I think, is a problem with promoting UBI in general, which does threaten institutional power here and there.
On this moral level, the society here is based on this contract that you pitch in what you can, and then you are entitled to the services. And Roosa, that's also the fact in Finland. I understand from the Labour Union when I spoke with them that things would fall apart if people were not expected or even had a duty to work in paid labor in order to finance the services that we all appreciate so much. How do you argue in this discussion?
First of all, I think I want to still very briefly go back to the experiment and the unemployment rates. So one important thing that I didn't mention was that obviously the group where the participants were long-term employed or people with short working history. So it's not representative of all unemployed people. That's why in Finland, I think the conversation has shifted towards services and these like personal activation plans for the employed. But your question was how to argue that there's no this
in the work I did with our book, I sense that there's a kind of an existential fear that we have some of the arguably most advanced societies taking care of most people in our societies in a good way, or we've had, and that this here is totally dependent on this contract, that everyone in accordance to their ability, and then you can enjoy the services according to your needs. And if you rock that boat, everything will fall apart. I don't know, do you not meet that kind of counter-argument?
Yeah, yes, of course.
And what do you say?
The whole fact of the able-bodied working-age people should be employed and find their livelihood through gainful employment. But that's a very general sort of a discussion in the Nordic countries and also in Europe in general.
And what do you say that if this becomes a voluntary thing?
Well, I mean, at least I think in Finland and also in general in the Nordic countries and in Europe, everyone sort of agrees that the working life has changed. For example, in Finland, the reasons for the experiment, there was a lot of discussion about how the labor market has changed, how there are these like bureaucratic traps and poverty traps in place, and that people could get more activated if there was less traps for employment. But then, what's the angle? Is it what do you want me to say that if people are not in gainful employment, then things would not fall apart? Or I mean, I don't know. So how it relates to UBI, I think, that's an empirical question, depends on the model of the UBI or what kind of effects it would have on employment. So, I mean, it's very case-based what you can say. And also, I think that, for example, Guy made a good point yesterday about the fact that, we shouldn't focus debate on, basic income as a means for activation, because I think, at least in Finland, in one way, the UBI debate has shifted to this perspective that maybe we can, still have the welfare state with lower costs and still provide some sort of like basic, like income floor through basic income. So in a way, it's like maybe there are some people who think that it could be some sort of like way to reduce the welfare state costs, but at the same time provide like an easier, like more simple floor for the citizens.
Do you?
But then again, there's a strong division because on the other hand, there's this like big block of parties and the leading parties who are going for the stricter conditions and activation as a means to.
Martin, you have made some observations to me about what arguments do open up for curiosity to basic income, and one of them was the fact that a lot of people are engaged now in controlling what kind of benefits to give to whom.
Yeah, I can talk about that. It's interesting in Denmark that there is this, probably also the other Nordic countries, this very strong sense of, in Denmark we have this saying, and you probably also have it, I just don't know it, that do your duty, demand your right. It's a core foundation that you have to take paid labor, as we've been talking about before. You have to take paid labor if you can, and if you can't, then you should be taken care of by the state. And this creates this model in most of the Nordic countries that you have to hit the bottom before you can get help. You have to have nothing before you can get subsidy. You have to be sick before you can get help. You have to know nothing before you can get an education, and so on and so forth. And it's become more and more prevalent, this hit the bottom kind of politics, with also the not only in the areas of subsidy and all that, but also in the education and in the healthcare and so on. At the same time, a lot of people don't really like much of that. There's especially in the you could say the job-seeking market, and that's where your question is relevant. There is from the more left, the leftist side of things, you could say that the job centers are seen as controlling and exploiting the workers, where you have to be activated and do meaningless jobs, or no, I'm sorry, you have to be activated in a position where you should not do anything that could count as a job, but you should be there. One of my friends were working in a kindergarten, and he was actually asking himself the question after he helped a girl which started to cry: should I do that, or would that take a job away from someone? It's real. I know you're laughing, but it's real. You have to be in a position where you should do something, but it should not be a job, because then that would fall under the unions and all and those kind of things. So it's a really complicated system that controls and exploits the workers. On the other hand, we see the same argument from a lot of the right-wing side of people, that it takes away the freedom and it takes away the possibility to act. And so it's sort of a common conception, at least in Denmark, that the current system doesn't work. There's a lot of things that's wrong with it and so on. But the core foundation of, do your duty, demand your rights, there should be some form of duty in this system that you should be held accountable for, is very much ingrained in the cultural code. And I've been to many places in Denmark, and even from some in the Green parties to especially social democracy, I agree on that, especially social democracy, to people of the libertarian point of view, almost everyone has this sort of ingrained somewhere.
We also have a strong tradition for voluntary work in our societies, where lots of great things are happening because of people's unpaid contribution, unpaid work. Sports, music, all kinds of mass movements that are run by parents and other interested people. Do you? You could argue that there would be participation duty, participation of something. For instance, you say this is so strong. Could you reframe it and say, well, yes, UBI could work with a duty to participate in some way?
Participation.
Yeah, exactly. That is not an unconditional income.
Do you argue that?
So you're talking about participation income, or? Well, so, like your conditions on activation, basically. You have to be active, whether in the gainful employment or in voluntary work or another.
I was thinking of asking you whether you argue about, if you accept this premise that here in these countries, this social contract that you have to contribute in order to have the rights, can you change that and incorporate it into a UBI system?
This is it. Okay. I'll just say
a short answer, and then
I'll just say shortly. There's one thing. Firstly, we have actually been speaking about that in a Danish context as a way towards basic income, because it is not basic income. But secondly, one of the most important things is that there is a misconception that duties should be arrived from the state and not from society. It is the situations that we are implemented in that should give us a sense of, meaningful, what we call it, duty. For instance, it is when I take a job, I get a duty to do the job. It is, and that's where the duty becomes relevant, because I could talk a lot about this, but I think someone should talk about it.
Øyvind?
Yeah, I was brought you into my point actually. So, and yeah, people already are active. So it's actually a moot point, I would say. I would say that yeah, you don't need to force people to be active, because people are active in society in many ways. There was a very interesting talk here yesterday about the future of work and labor, etc. And what you define as what. There is a difference between what you do for a salary and what you just do because it's a necessity of life, and what you want to do for the people around you, and all the fun things you can do together that actually create values but are not like salaried labor. And there are so many models now for people to produce stuff without having actually someone above them giving them the orders. Like on the internet, for instance, lots of YouTubers are out there producing content, and they maybe mostly get paid, of course, through some YouTube ads. There are no like direct, they are not working for YouTube, they don't take orders, and they have like Patreon accounts. So they just, if they do something people generally like, then they can get some money. People put like $10 in their account every month, for instance, and so they can continue doing stuff without any kind of very concrete strings attached. And we have this old conception. You see it in like small villages in Norway that are, maybe there was a big business in this small village once. Norsk skog, Norwegian forestry, for instance. And now that big business has pulled out, and these small societies are now like pretty much in decline. No young people want to live there anymore. There are no opportunities there. And this comes from being stuck in the conception that, it's only like big business and government that can create jobs. And this is of course wrong. That's we've seen in basic income experiments. For instance, the interesting one in Namibia sounds like far away, but it's not actually that the principles are not that distant from how it is in these small Norwegian societies that has been kind of left barren. So when you give people basic income, they start inventing their own jobs and starting their own projects. And like every little town or small economy just wants to have things to do. People want to be social, people want to have services, local services. Tourist industry always wants locally produced goods and services, etc. So if you give people a basic income, I think one of the biggest or best arguments actually is what it would do for all these districts, and you can remove some of that attraction into the big cities, and like, no, it's an investment in the entire country that you live in, and it's an investment in people anywhere. You don't have to be this urban type to get all the opportunities. You can live anywhere, you can start there. It's going to be much easier to just start there. It's much cheaper to live there, of course. People can establish themselves easier and just get the local economy started. And in those like local economies, there are probably very few that would sack their money in Cayman Islands. So it would be a very easily taxable activity.
Lena?
Yes, I was thinking this with a contract that do your duty, and this is how we can use, because it's changing. This contract, who is it for? It's just for us workers. It's not for the people that are higher up in the society. In bank scandals, look what's happening. It's shocking, and people are actually starting to wake up. So all that anger. I mean, why should we contribute when the rest of them don't contribute? And that's when you, instead of turning their anger towards the immigration and put the blame on them, we need to collect it. This is the precariat that guys talked about, and to get these people and get them to realize that UBI is the way of having a new contract with society. And that's what I found most interesting in Finland. People's trust for politicians as well and society grew with that experiment. And I think that's so important. I think that's what we should aim at.
Roosa?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So just since you were asking about how you argue in relation to this like voluntary work and activity, right, in general, that's already like a one particular choice to make, or what angle you choose for to talk about basic income, whether its only worth is in getting people contribute to the GDP or that. But I think that in Finland, at least, and I think in general in Europe, the activation paradigm has been so strong from the 90s that it's one way you can do it is to, as we are sort of talking here, to amplify the concept of what is activity and so forth. But like in the light of the experiment results, another thing is that that the health effects can show before these like employment or other types of like activity results. So in a way, like it's you can the health arguments are supporting also this idea of like an active welfare state and people being active, because you are like maintaining the ability of people to participate in society in a wider sense. And also, one problem of this employment and the employed people, unemployed people debate and deservingness and so on is that most of the people perceive it as in a static way, so that if I'm employed right now, I don't necessarily consider the fact that I might get unemployed or sick or disabled or I might want to study in between or so on. I think this is slowly changing in Finland, and more there's more and more talk about this, like how UBI could and enable shifts in between these different positions of working and being on a parental leave and working and maybe starting a business and so forth. So I think we need a more like dynamic understanding of the life cycle of people, instead of thinking about these groups of people as if they were like static blocks in a society.
There is another huge trend that creates this need to have something basic underneath all the changes in our lives, which is automation. There's no consensus among experts on whether this will create mass employment or not. But considering what has happened before, that there have always been more jobs created than before that disruption, this might happen again. And what I see is a trend towards discussing not the number of jobs, but the content of such jobs. And we have, of course, this has been a topic in Sweden with a researcher called Michaelsen, I think. He talked about the concept of empty jobs. Then you had David Graeber, of course, with his bullshit jobs that is widely read, I think, in the Nordic countries. And you have now last year a good-selling book called Pseudo Work, How We Became Busy Doing Nothing in Denmark. And we have 2 minutes left, and I'd like Martin maybe to tell us a little bit about how that idea of meaningless work is taking on.
Well, I will try to in short. Last year they came to our last year we had a meeting where the authors of this book, they told us about this book, and one of the stories from this book that really made an impact to me, and how a lot of work is really, to say it's useless in a sense, but it's not useless in the context of our society today, it was a story about this private consultant, who had a lot of time on his hands, and he watched the website, and he found out that people, they can't enter our site correctly because the bottom to the site is at the lower right, and that's not where people usually find it. So he wanted to lift up to the top right. And since he had a lot of times on his hands, and he wanted to show that he is a good worker and a hard worker, and he wanted to do it correctly and all this, he used 3 months of planning and meetings and everything to say, how can we develop this website to be more interactive and all this kind of stuff. and in the end it was just moved from the lower right corner to the top right corner. And that's the point of this book in actuality, is that it shows how that because it is so important for us to show that we do a good job, it's so important that we show that we are hardworking people, we actually do society a misfavor because we try to show ourselves being a good worker. And one of the key points of the book is actually saying that if you want to be a good worker, sometimes you just have to go home. That's the key point he said, actually.
I think actually that's an okay way to end this session. I thank you for participating, and good luck in your work.
Thank you.